justice for all.
Thank you. Next item is roll call for planning and zoning.
Joe Dolman.
Here.
Jim Garrison.
Here.
Lloyd Horton. Nancy Matson. Here. Rory Pagan.
Here.
Tom Pilla. Tom Searing.
Here.
Paul Nygren. Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the oath of office for Nancy Matson and Lloyd Horton. You need to, you can just read it, read the oath.
You can do it individually or together.
Sure.
Together it is.
I, Nancy Matson, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
I will support the Constitution of the United States and of the state
state
of
of
Minnesota,
Minnesota, and
faithfully
for and
for
on
and behalf of citizens of Linwood, discharge the duties of the Office of Planning and Zoning Commission for the town of Linwood in the county of Anoka, state of Minnesota, to the best of my judgment and ability.
There we go. Sign the paper and you're on board for another year, 3 years. Whatever. Thank you. The next item is the approval of the agenda as it was posted.
I make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any additions? Hearing none, the agenda stands. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Next item, approval of the planning and zoning minutes from June 18th. They were sent out.
I make a motion they are approved as written.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any additions or corrections? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. At this time, we will close the regular planning and zoning meeting and convene a joint meeting with the town board. Is there a motion to close the planning and zoning?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded to close the planning and zoning. Tom moved.
Tom.
All in favor of said motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Call the order of the town board. I guess it's your job now.
Like you said, that, whose job is
Do we both have to call our? Okay, I will call the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order.
call the order of the town board? Roll call of the town board, go ahead.
Supervisor Ledke?
Here.
Supervisor Bolivar?
Here.
Supervisor Searing?
Here.
Supervisor Parker?
Here.
Supervisor Olson?
Here.
Okay. Comments from zoning administrator, Susan?
Thank you. As zoning administrator, enforcement of our ordinances is a part of my job description. While some residents are comfortable to try and resolve disputes with their neighbor, others are not, or it hasn't produced a favorable outcome and ends up in my office. Complaints received in the office specifically relating to chickens have been primarily for one or more of the following: the amount of coops, the location, the appearance materials of the coops, chickens not staying on the property, and rooster noise. The provided comments questions are from the zoning enforcement administrative perspective. I included that in the meeting packet, and would you like to go item by item?
We're all going over the margarita.
Sounds good to me.
I'm going to these meetings way more now. I miss this planning and zoning meeting. Even this is June 12th.
So the margarita before or after the meeting, I didn't know what that. Okay, I'm sorry, Susan, go ahead.
That's okay. Wondering if you all would like to entertain kind of going through just the concerns that I had from, I said, like the zoning, the enforcement, and what we see, what I see in the office, kind of one by one. Those are the few things as going through the ordinance and then kind of few revisions that I had seen, looking at it from an enforcement standpoint, that zoning standpoint, how are they going to be addressed moving forward with any proposed changes?
Yeah. I think that'd be the easiest way to go through it, Joe.
What's that?
Do you have a problem going that way? Have her go individually for what her concerns are?
Individual, with the concerns that the office knows how the town board and planning commission intends this to be enforced, or what the intention of the ordinance would be, when and if it's adopted, either in its present form or in an amended form.
Okay.
Well, that's fine.
Okay, sounds great. One of the first concerns or questions that I had, just kind of considering the coop as a portable structure. From what I understand, the portable structure portion of the ordinance was more geared towards the Menards, the Home Depot, the carport type structures that you would use temporarily on your property, easily portable. And I'm just wondering if Planning and Zoning Town Board intends to consider the coop to be a portable structure or to be considered an actual structure.
When we, from the planning commission standpoint, when we've looked at this before, and a year ago or better, we talked about a chicken coop being just an accessory building, another portable temporary structure. I still think that's a possibility. There's some discrepancies in our proposed ordinance versus the existing ordinance on square footage of the building and setbacks from front property line. I know you mentioned that, the 30 foot from the front yard versus 40 foot for every other structure that we have. It'd be more beneficial for the office to be consistent on that. Square footage wise, there was something about 200 square feet versus 250 square feet for a temporary structure. The ordinance that the planning and zoning had worked on showed 120 square feet for a chicken coop. I don't know where we want to go with that. I mean, Lloyd Horton has put a lot of work into amendments, changes, proposed changes, trying to compromise stuff to where it's appropriate or acceptable to the different residents in the community. And we're trying to compromise on this, I know. The square footage part of it, 120 square feet is enough for a chicken, 250, even better, but how many of them shacks can you have on one property? And there is the way, I believe the way I read the proposed ordinance, there would be no more than 2 temporary structures on the property. That's kind of the way I read into it. I don't know what the rest of the planning and zoning did. The square footage was addressed in that, but there would be no more than 2 temporary structures. To me, that'd be adequate unless they wanted to go through the process of variance or something to have more. But on again, acreage is a factor, and that got mentioned in some of your updated recommendations. How many acres you can have, how many chickens. The building thing, how many number of buildings didn't seem to change a lot. It was you're allowed only a garage, a house, a garage, and 1 accessory building. And then 2 temporary buildings is what I understood the ordinance. Is that the way the office understands it?
The current?
Current ordinance. 1 temporary structure?
Yes.
The proposed one then was 2. There was something about 2 in there. Okay. I'm not sure what the town board or planning and zoning would like to see with that, but there were some differences that I saw from what we have to what we're trying to go for. And if we're trying to change the accessory building thing just to accommodate chicken coops, I don't know that that's really the way to go. I mean, chicken coops are one thing, horse barns are another thing. I mean, how much of this are we gonna fine tune to make it work for everybody? I don't know. Input, whatever.
Well, what I've always thought of that is that any building that is not set in footings is a portable building. It's on a skid, it's built on the ground, but it's not, doesn't have a cement base to it. it is always, in my mind, has always been a portable building. Something that, like I say, if it's poured foundation, it's up there, that becomes a permanent structure. If I put a shed out behind my house and it's on skids or it's on the dirt, it could be moved. To me, that's portable. I don't know what anybody else's thought is, but that's always been my thought. That's what I've always thought of it as. So, just for that, to me, it's a portable building. Whether it's a chicken coop, it's a garden shed, it's a feed shed, that's a portable structure. In my mind, that's just me. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but this is just in my mind. So, and I know that, as you say, I've got a shed behind my house that came from Home Depot. And I used to keep my lawnmower in, my tools in. Could that be a chicken coop? Sure could. All I gotta do is put a door on that sucker and a couple roofs in there, and there you go, and a couple boxes, you got yourself a chicken coop in there. So I think the hard part is sit there and be able to say that something is a chicken coop or something's a shed. Cause I took a chicken coop and cleaned it out, and it can now just now become a shed. So I don't know how we're gonna differentiate besides what's a coop and what's a shed, but I mean, that's, anybody else's thoughts? I mean, that's just my thoughts on it, so.
Tom Searing.
I also have the notion that a permanent building has to have footings.
Or on a floating slab. And if it's got a cement slab under it, that's no longer a temporary structure.
Right.
But if it's just like Mr. Parker said, as far as skids or something like that, I mean, I've got them, you've got them, just temporary sheds that can be moved around, 8x16s, whatever. That's a temporary structure, but the number of them, how many are we gonna allow on parcels? One, according to our current ordinance. Two, if we change it to the recommended ordinance.
And I'll agree with that, I agree with you. Cause I mean, if I was gonna put a chicken coop, I was gonna get chickens, and I got my shed out there for my lawnmower and stuff, as I do now. And right now, with the ordinance the way it is, it kinda says that I'd be restricted, I couldn't put another one on there. I got 5 acres. I know, ridiculous. Be able to restrict somebody to one shed out there, I mean, you're talking two, yeah, two would probably be, depending on the size of them. But if you got, what's my shed out there now? I think I have right now is an 8x12 out back right now. If I had a 12x14, 12x16, had a couple of those, that'd be pretty good sized sheds behind the house. 2 8x10s, not that many sheds outside. So, kind of to fine tune to come up with that, there's usually come up with that number that works. But for acreage wise, I could see if somebody had a different one, let's use Pond Lake area. Now they had is a lot. But you put 2 large sheds on it, kind of fills up the whole yard. So I myself personally, I don't know where we're gonna, what's comfortable to say what they can and can't have. So I say, you can't just say this is a chicken coop and that's a shed. In my mind, it has to be something that you can have X number of outside buildings, is what it's gonna have to be.
Regardless of the usage.
Regardless of the usage. Cause like I said, I can take a chicken coop, clean it out, make the thing doggone, make it a shop for me. So I think just getting stuck on, it's a chicken coop. Well, I think we need to get past that and go to, it's a shed. And we need to regulate how many buildings you can put on it versus it's a coop or it's a building.
Which I think is where Susan has gone with this number of buildings, not so much the usage or whatever. Square footage is an issue. Acreage could be something in the calculation of it. But again, if you got 20 acres, it's different than if you got a quarter acre. And
Agreed.
Both ends of the spectrum within Linwood Township. Do we wanna make it acreage specific? I'm not real sure. I mean, that's gonna be harder to enforce too, because again, the way the proposed thing that Lloyd put together, it can be on acreage that you don't own, but it's part of your property if you're leasing it. I mean, we've done that with livestock before. If they lease the 5 acres next door, they have enough acreage to hold livestock. So I mean, that's another factor that is kind of incorporated into what we currently have. no chickens, whatever, on this proposed ordinance on vacant lots unless they're adjoined to your resident. I mean, that's an option, but do we need to adopt this whole whatever ordinance in order to accommodate the problems of a few people? I guess this has turned into a real rat's nest in my opinion for what it could be, but
And I
try
agree
to
with you.
satisfy people about little things that maybe we can just put a blanket ordinance together and you can kind of avoid some problems.
You know, the fight I've got within myself is, this is their property. This is their property, not ours. We don't own this property. And we seem to be just keep trying to regulate what people can do with their property. I mean, if you come told me I couldn't do something on my land, I'd probably start getting upset. If I come over and told you what you could do on your property, and you wanna do something, it gets you upset. And this is why I have a difficult time dealing with this right now, is because that's mine. I paid for that. And yes, I know that you're gonna go, well, you know, you have neighbors and you have to abide by your neighbors and stuff. But there's gotta be some give and take here someplace. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Mike.
Mr. Billa.
Along those lines, in our existing code book, which is very exciting reading, it covers everything we need to cover as far as, people complaining about their neighbor's chickens. It's spelled out completely who's responsible, what the ordinance says about it, and it's also covered under, a little bit under the animal section. So I think, no offense, I think a convoluted, in detail ordinance isn't necessary, because it's already covered in what we got.
And I agree with you in a lot of ways. I think we're trying to create something here that, I don't know if we need to create it.
We would need Philadelphia lawyers for the police officers to be able to go and serve the person who's violating the ordinance. It would need to be interpreted.
Because like I say, if I got a problem with my neighbor, I go talk to my neighbor. If we can't work it out with that, then yeah, you may have to call the police, you call down the township and say, is there something here that they're violating? If they're not, then they're not.
Carol Siri.
The one thing that Lloyd did that I did like, a lot of people have 10 acres, okay? But their width of their property is very, very narrow, and their neighbors are right there. And you talked about, instead of acres, you talked about feet, how many feet from the neighbor. I liked that part of it.
Other comments? I'm gonna ask Susan, and probably Pam Olson also. Enforceability, that's been an issue on stuff, as far as our ordinances haven't been specific enough to enforce it. What Tom referred to in the ordinance as far as the nuisance ordinance and other things, is that gonna resolve anything if we don't change something in the ordinance? Do we have to get some more language or some more specifics in order to make it enforceable? Susan.
That was a good look.
Okay, do you wanna go first or should I? The nuisance part, I think the way it is defined in our orders is a public nuisance. And, public nuisance, I think, can be very difficult to enforce as far as noise, number. Sure, if someone has a complaint about people's dogs on their property, you know, we can send them a letter, but we always tell them if there's noise, if there's anything like that, to contact the deputies. Because that's what they're there for, they can enforce it immediately. I could get an email, I it comes to my desk, it gets prioritized, maybe I don't get a letter out for 5, 6, 7, 8 days. I'm not gonna probably sit out there, and I'm not gonna have a decibel meter in my vehicle, I'm not gonna count your dogs, and you can say you have more than 3, or you can say you have, the complaint is you have more than 2, you need a kennel license. No, I don't, that one went away. It's very hard to enforce what goes on inside people's homes. So as far as enforceability, I think the complaints that have been received, and Pam could attest to prior to when I've been here, but it's been the look of them, it's been they're too close to my house, and it's been the noise. Again, the noise is extremely difficult to enforce. And as far as before me, I know that there was actually, people that just want to have chickens and for themselves as pets, as food sources. But we've actually have had people that had approached the township that wanted to do kind of a slaughtering operation, basically want to have a business of slaughtering thousands a week. So how does that fit into, I think we were able to find something that said that they couldn't do that, but how does that fit into what we do have? I hope that answers the question.
Do you want to address it, Sam?
Yeah, so again, when the complaints come in, we have to look and see if there's a violation. In the case that Susan's talking about, they wanted 10,000 chickens a week. We were able to say no because the plan was to be butchering them, a slaughterhouse. So we had other places in the law to not allow that. But the question came up then, what is that number? Is 1,000 chickens acceptable? By having no numbers in there, it kind of leaves us out there in the open. When someone comes in and says they must have too many, they had, one of the complaints was chickens, ducks, and what else is the other?
Chickens, ducks, geese, whatever.
Chickens, ducks, geese, and enormous amounts of them. Again, the only thing that we could do is say they need to be contained onto their own property. But as far as numbers, they could have as many, and we dealt with the building as well. What we deal with is, we call them accessory structures, and because it was closer to the road, the facade needed to match, and they had to remove one of their structures because it was a little community of sheds that kept popping up for each animal. So that's kind of where we're looking at too, is that what is your vision of community, that you would like properties to look at? The other issue that comes up too is saying we don't need to, so the numbers of chicken, if you think it's reasonable, again, not a major issue, it's maybe a couple complaints a year. And sometimes we can find other ways to control it, as far as they need to be sheltered or they need to be penned. The other consideration too is if it's just going to be another building, it really does need to come through as a zoning review, because Susan's consideration on everything is you can't exceed more than 25% impervious surface. Now again, on large acreage, a bigger lot, it's not an issue. On the smaller lots, it is an issue because many of the small lots around the lakes have already exceeded their 25% impervious surface. So it's another place that we want to look at that. If they've already overbuilt their property and now you're going to add a number of chickens in another building, it's something to consider. So if you should choose to go with adding another building to the property, it needs to come back that it would require, in most cases, a zoning review, or at least an administrative consideration of some kind.
Susan?
And I'd like to point out too, as Pam mentioned, and that the impervious surface is actually the ordinance that the Anoka County, it's the Anoka County Shoreland Ordinance. And I want to specify that shoreland is not limited to lake shore. Shoreland is 1,000 feet from a lake, 300 feet from a river. So even if you're necessarily not on the lake, if you're within that distance, we have to abide by the Anoka County Ordinance, which of course the county supersedes us in this case, and we have to be the minimum of that. We could be more restrictive, but we are the minimum for them. So I just want to clarify that as well.
Other input from planning and zoning or town board?
So zoning review, right?
It's $50 for a zoning review.
Okay, so it's $50. And then if you figure, even if two temporary structures, let's say there were 250 each or 500 feet, so there's a certain amount of square footage amount between a house, a garage, and or an accessory building, and then 2 storage buildings. I'm trying to get to what is the magic number of square foot or acreage before a person would have to come before a planning review. You know what I mean? It's like,
To differ from that 25%?
yeah, because if we're gonna hang on the impervious surface part, there's a certain minimum. Because a person that's got 20 acres probably doesn't make sense that they have to come in and have a review done, because clearly they're not going to exceed 25%.
Right, at 20 some acres, you've got probably a good 900 and some thousand square feet. But it's the smallest, there's not a magic number, it depends upon the lot size, and then of course it's the square footage, and that includes gravel, it includes pavers of some sorts, it includes your driveway, so it's not just the buildings themselves. And I do want to specify that per Minnesota State Building Code, and that's per Rum River, they looked up the building code for me, I think the first week I was here, because I got a whopper of a question. But any portable structure over 200 square feet requires an actual building permit, so that's gonna go to Rum River, and then it's gonna come in for a zoning review anyways, but anything over 200 square feet would require a building permit per Minnesota State Building Code. Carport included, they have to make sure it's fastened properly to the ground as far as, wind, storms, etc. So that's actually Minnesota State Building Code.
For clarity, the zoning review isn't just the impervious surface and setbacks. It's a site plan that says I'm gonna put this okay shed in this location.
Absolutely, yep, it's setback, it's impervious surface, it's also looking at the other buildings on there, absolutely. Ordinary water line, wetlands, because there's certain restrictions, of course, as far as how you can be from the ordinary water line of certain lakes, nothing within 50 feet of a wetland, so it takes into account all those items.
Okay, one thing as far as your zoning review, and it's addressed in the proposed ordinance, number of chickens. I mean, if somebody's got 200 chickens, it's no longer a personal family thing. This is a commercial operation. You don't need 200 chickens to feed a family. There are acreage stuff that Lloyd had put together with so many chickens, so many acres, so many feet setback. That's a guideline you could go by, rather than having somebody with 2 acres and having 50 chickens on it. I mean, there's no longer enough. It's not just to supplement your family, you're supplementing other neighbors and whatever. And I'm not trying to take away egg sales to small neighborhoods, not that, but it's a matter of, I believe we need to have some type of limit on number of critters, on acreage, number of chickens, geese, ducks, whatever, per acre, per square footage or whatever, and that's in some of the guidelines. We don't have that now in our ordinance. I think something needs to be in place, so there's something for the staff to refer to as far as that. And I'm not trying to take away people's individual rights at that, but in all reality, you get beyond so many chickens, horses, cows, whatever, pretty soon you're a commercial operation, you're raising livestock. And that's where I think we need to differentiate home type stuff versus commercial potential business stuff. 20 years ago it wouldn't have been an error, 30 years ago wouldn't have been a problem. The more people we get, the smaller the lots, the higher the density. It's something that I think needs to be incorporated into our rules so that we're not offending as many people as we could. Okay, maybe that's not the way to put it, but that's where a lot of this comes down to, is that somebody's not happy with their neighbor's operation. And if we can put some guidelines in our ordinance that's reasonable, and again, we don't want a slaughterhouse, nobody needs 200 chickens or whatever, and there's outfits in the township that have that many chickens, and they're selling eggs, don't call it what you want. Is it a commercial thing, or is it a home occupation? I mean, that's a different deal again. Number of buildings, we already said that's probably a factor we could get into. Telling people what to do with their property, yeah, nobody likes being told that, but at some point there has to be regulation on things. Yes, sir.
There's some regulation on humane treatment of animals. I mean, you couldn't have 200 chickens on a quarter acre with a house and humanely raise them, could you?
Who's gonna inspect it and how do you regulate it? Yeah, you shouldn't have it, you're right, there's too many, the density is too
You're
high.
saying there has to be some limitations. That I would think should be the minimum or the maximum number of chickens
But
we
we have
can
no
humanely put on there.
regulations like that currently
Right.
to regulate that, so something I think needs to be in place so that the township has some guidelines to go by. And what was proposed in the ordinance is one of the proposals, was the number of chickens, and the number of feet setback and stuff. It seems reasonable, actually pretty liberal on some stuff, but more liberal than most communities around us, I know that, as far as the number of chickens and the number of things. But I think we need to get something on the books besides just the size of building and number of buildings. I do think that there needs to be something for a reference to the township to look at as far as enforcement. John?
So how many total complaints have we ever had about somebody having too many chickens other than the one that was trying to do the slaughterhouse? Do we know? I mean, is this a real common complaint that my neighbor has 12 chickens and it's too many, or? I mean, do we get that complaint about the number of chickens people have?
A couple times a year.
A couple times a year as far as the number of chickens somebody has.
That's to the town staff.
Correct.
Because we, in the planning and zoning committee, we've had several people come in and complain about chickens, and we even had one gentleman complain, because he knew we were working on an ordinance, and he was wondering why we're taking so long. Yeah, but, yeah.
And again, remember, it takes a written complaint for the enforcements to move into action. And so, not every one of those, some of those were some at the counter, or a phone call, or they came to you for resolution on it. But it really, in order for us to move, we're complaint driven, and it needs to be a signed written complaint. It is not just, hey, I'm upset with my neighbor, but not willing to put the name down. So, is it a very common problem? No, but it does stymie us a little bit. And like I said, we've had some proposals that are a large number of them. Usually we can use some of the other parts of the code to help correct or help people bring neighbors a little closer together and not fighting it, but the other part, as I mentioned too, is the enforcement. And again, you might be better off with no ordinance as opposed to creating something you can't enforce.
Or you put it on the books and it gives a bunch of people something that they can lean on to complain about their neighbors even more. You know, so it can create as much divide as it can, you know, peace in the neighborhood.
And we also get people wanting to move here and just wanna know, how many can I have? I can't, in this community, I can't have 12 chickens, how many can I have there? They're just allowed, that's our answer, allowed and no limits. So, it isn't always complaints, sometimes it's to just being able to give people an idea of what's expected here, what the vision is.
So if I would like to say a few things on the structures. In the beginning, we didn't really look, we were asked to come up with an ordinance. And we came up with one that was fairly short, not too involved. But then it started growing. And then I was looking at the different ordinances on structures. And there's 4 sections that restrict the number of either sheds or portable structures to 1. And then there's another current regulation in animals that, or it I think it's in zoning, but, it says any structure that's for housing animals will be, 100 feet from any lot line. And that one by itself would restrict almost all of the chicken coops. Because I'm thinking most of the chicken coops are closer to 100 feet to a property line. So that's why we kind of got into the different sections on structures, because we wanted to allow chicken coops. Right now, it wouldn't be allowed almost in any the residential, especially the smaller lots. You wouldn't be allowed to have one. But we have a lot right now, right? So that was one of the things we were trying to do, was allow chicken coops. And that's why I kind of got into all the different structure areas of the code.
Other input, Bob Miller. Wasn't the original complaint about somebody who had their chicken coop right up against their property line? I thought that was the whole original complaint.
The rooster was crowing.
Well, yeah, but his property line was here, his house was way over here, and he put it right up against his fence where his neighbor's house was right there. So I'm a huge fan of the lot line restrictions, huge fan of that. I think, because, you know, I had a chicken coop for 20 years, and believe it or not, I had it right in the center of my yard. Still upset my neighbor to beat the bandit, but at least I try to keep it away from his property, but I'm a huge fan of that lot line restriction. And that would eliminate some of the issues, but.
Like the 10-foot, like the ordinance says, or 50 feet
Yes.
as proposed?
I think, you could go anywhere from 1 to 1 million and somebody's still gonna be mad at you, so, it's like, yeah,
And who's gonna go survey the property?
that's the issue. And pretty soon, you know, as a zoning, if you gotta do a whole assessment, you gotta get your yard surveyed, well, pretty soon, Quick Trip's 99-cent eggs are a hell of a lot easier than going through all this stuff to have a chicken, so.
Well, I like the second access, or the temporary structure. I think that is a great add. You know, and if it's over the 200 square feet, they're gonna have to have a zoning review and then setbacks and everything. You know, and I'm only one of 5 people, and so just for transparency, but I would have a struggle approving an ordinance that would restrict the number of chickens at this point, because, you know, yes, there's been people that have questioned it, but it doesn't seem to be the crux of what the complaint, you know, the main complaint that brought this before the board is. I think that it's important that the ordinance does say that poultry is allowed, you know, so that this doesn't keep coming back time and time again. The setback, I think, should be our normal setbacks. I agree with Bob, it can't be up against a property line. It needs to have regular setbacks, but I think if we continue to make every little, you know, specific specification of how this is supposed to be, we're just opening up a huge can of worms moving forward.
There were 2 things. Carol, go ahead.
Originally, the complaint was about a rooster, not chickens, except for the fact that it was up against the property line. So, if we don't say, let's talk about a small lot. If we don't say, we don't have any restrictions on how many chickens or how many roosters you can have on a small lot, especially a lake lot, because as much as I'd like the lake side of my yard to be my front yard, it's not. I've been fighting with my husband for 20 years over whether the back or the front is right, you know? But according to our ordinance, between the house and the street is the front yard. So, and if you can't put a chicken coop in the front yard, then you can put it on the lake side. I don't know. I just think that on a small lot, how many, there needs to be something that says, can I have 30 chickens on my lot? I have two or three roosters. Of course, I shot, but other than that.
Jim, you got a question, 'cause you got that look on your face, all of a sudden, your eyes kind of lit up for a second. Can you speak up?
I thought on the lake lot, the front yard and backyard were different, that the accessory buildings on the lake side were considered front yard.
Not according to our ordinances.
Well, look at planning and zoning, some say, okay, or if planning and zoning, on a lake lot, which side is the front yard?
Defer to our administrator.
In the past, it has been considered that the lakeside, is your front yard. That's been, maybe not in the ordinance, but it has been considered that's your front yard. And then the roadside is your backside. That provision is then in there when it comes to, putting accessory buildings up, temporary structures and stuff. That goes back many years.
It is not right, Joe.
Okay, I'm just saying what's been followed as practice. Maybe it's not in the ordinance, but people have gotten by with it all over the township on lakeshore property. So, and, I don't want you to turn into a domestic dispute between you and Tom.
Susan?
Our ordinance does not differentiate that. It specifically says, I'm reading from our ordinance right here, lot line front means the boundary of a land which abuts an existing or dedicated public street, and in the case of a corner lot, should be the shortest dimension on a public street. There's no differentiation for lake lots. And when I'm doing a zoning review since I started, I'm going from the front of the house if you're on a lake. I'm following the ordinance verbatim.
So the ordinance has been violated on 234th on the north side of Martin Lake. There was some accessory buildings that were put in regarding the front and rear yard. Either way, the ordinance doesn't allow for it, fine, we'll go on from there. Building setback, as far as accessory buildings, 10 foot from the side line should be the same on all structures, doesn't matter. We go with that, it's in our ordinances now, coop, chicken coop, garden shed, whatever, 10 foot from the property line. In the proposed ordinance, there was something about 30 foot from the front yard setback, and Lloyd's proposal.
A portable structure is allowed to be.
But 40 feet is standard setback. If we stuck with 40 foot, everything's consistent and it's easier to enforce. I'm just trying to simplify our ordinances for the sake of enforcement. And again, temporary structures, you're right. But how many people have these canvas structures out between their house and the road? That's a temporary structure. Shipping containers, I mean, they're sitting there between the road and the house, and they're within the setbacks, you know, and they're around the township in many different situations. We allow that. Maybe it doesn't follow our ordinance, but we allow for it. So how do we go after those people and make them remove their stuff or move it back to that 40-foot setback? Or do we lessen the setback, you know, from the front yard on a temporary structure? I'm just throwing it out there. If we're gonna have consistency in the ordinance, it'd be easier. The other discrepancy I found in the proposal was 200 square feet on a second temporary structure. Why not 250 like our ordinance calls for? Just no more than two structures of no more than 250 feet, 250 square feet. That and then the 40 and 30 foot setback thing are two things that I found in difference in what we have to what we're trying to go for. If we just make it consistent for enforcement, well, I guess, possibilities, it would be easier for the office to understand, easier for the residents to understand, and maybe less confusing to all of us. There's no reason to have different numbers for different situations. It should be the same for most situations. And then if there's a problem with it, somebody needs a variance, somebody needs